Hello again. I am so sorry that things have been slow lately. As before, the world is chaotic, moving is chaotic, especially when a ton of your stuff gets delayed by several months. And most integrally, my editor got new responsibilities at their job that we thought we could work through, but can't, setting everything back. Still, this is a project I've wanted to do for a while anyway, and it requires minimal editing, so feel free to just have me on in the background. Anyway, before we get to this review of the light novel RWBY The Session, I'd like to thank my wonderful patrons for making these episodes possible. Links below. RWBY The Session is a Japanese light novel written by Kyosuke Izuki and published by Gakkaga Bunko on July 19, 2017 and takes place between volumes 1 and 2. This is in some ways the beach episode that certain factions were straining for since the earlier days, but despite the cover, RWBY as usual does far more with the premise than one would expect. For reference, I won't comment over much on the writing quality as I only have access to a fan's translated copy, which while appreciated is maybe not perfectly conveying the author's skill. Thus, I'll focus more on plots, themes and character beats, but first, a brief summary. We open on Jean and Ren attending a tech convention, the former hoping to invite Weiss and the latter looking for new cookware, and Jean gets scooped up by a mech elephant exhibit. This segues into Team RWBY, who are already there because it's RWBY's day to pick an event for their holidays, and she wanted to check out the exhibits. She is elated at the prospect of fighting a mecha elephant. After the mech is disabled by the team, Blake's Volume 2 White Fang paranoia is already on full display as she fears the young Iona Rockshaw was a White Fang agent. We also get some unseemly hints of what the exhibit's host company, the Starhead Industrial Company, SIC, is like, with Usko Anthrop's rough treatment of Iona and him buying off Team RWBY from reporting the event with tickets to Sapang Island Resort. Iona provides similar tickets to Team Juniper for her own reasons. We cut briefly to Roman trying and failing to escape a deal gone bad with his White Fang mooks and being very ticked off about it. Team RWBY still got some internal tensions, with Blake closing off, Yang wanting to relax and Weiss wanting to train, and RWBY struggling to balance their personalities and desires as leader, eventually leading to team splits with RWBY, Yang, Ren and Nora going to the beach while Weiss, Blake, Pyrrha and Jean head to the training grounds. Grimm end up attacking the island and the students are conscripted to try and clear them out and help with the evacuation by CEO Fort Lee, who also gives RWBY some leadership advice. But during the mission they encounter strange folks that undermine communications, robots disguised as Grimm and mine carts that shouldn't be there, all while Iona is a recurring presence whose moods and intentions are unpredictable and ominous. We also encounter Roman again, who's been trying to steal dust from a hidden mine on the island. Long story short, the SIC has an alliance with the Silver Bullet Brotherhood, a militant human supremacy faction. They've been using the island resort to kidnap and enslave faunas, keeping them in what they call the cage and using them as labour for mining dust and intending to create their own nation there. Iona was initially on board with this due to her brother dying by a faunus' hands and likely Fort Lee's pre-existing biases, but has come to have doubts and collaborates with the teams to try and help free the faunus without Fort Lee getting the chance to blow up the mines to hide the evidence. This leads to a string of battles and ambushes, including Blake trying to gun it solo for a while and convincing the White Fang accompanying Roman of what's going on, Pyrrha and Iona briefly being caught only for her to go full Magneto on the guards, and Team RWBY uniting to take down Fort Lee. All the while, the theatrical villain is blasting music and his agents, led by Usko, confront Pyrrha. Team RWBY overcomes Fort Lee's semblance, only to almost die when Roman sets off all the explosives before escaping. Fort Lee dies trying to spite-kill Blake, and hilariously, no one on RWBY even pretends to care. But everyone is able to escape together, though it seems many of the liberated faunus went on to join the White Fang. We have a brief debrief with Ozpin before ending on a happy note. Summary over, onto the review. First up, plot. In terms of overall story and structure, I think it's quite solid, though I am unsure the translation quite conveys everything perfectly. Still, we got a good explanation for all the moving parts, almost everyone has something decent to do, and good challenges to overcome, with the villains whose plans are evil but coherent, and there's enough intrigue and surprises to keep people curious. I find this is also a fun twist on the usually mindless beach episodes. We maybe got 1 minute of beach shenanigans before the actual plot kicked off. Plus, it does a good job of setting up the additional support Adam Splinter faction of the White Fang has going for them in Volume 2, making it feel relevant to the main story. There's also implications of ties to the Grim Eclipse game and Merlot Industries as well. Amazingly, we also get some good explanation for Iona's interest in Jean. Namely, it's that he's weak and kind of pathetic, but tries to do things despite that, and as a result reminds Iona of her brother, which ties together well with everything else we see of her. Which is a good segue into characters. I'll get the main critique out of the way quickly. The story does not handle Yang well at all. She feels more like her chibi self than canon, and they got how her semblance works wrong, thinking her hair needs to be messed up. However, that is also the worst of it. Hilariously, Jacques Sneer remains true to character as that meme, tragic, the worst person you know, just made a really great point by having refused to work with the Silver Bullet Brotherhood in the past. Ren and Nora sadly don't get a ton to do, but play their supporting roles very ably. Weiss is definitely feeling very V1 coded, but this makes sense given the era, and while she's a bit high-strung, she does also make the same best teammate efforts. Plus, as seems to be the tradition in Japanese adaptations, she is deeply down bad for Pyrrha, which is hilarious. Jean is very much in his early volume self, and so more than a bit grating, but largely in character, and his bond with Iona does warrant his prominence. Blake's Volume 2 White Fang obsession is already rearing its head, and she's especially closed off and paranoid and still trying to do everything solo, which fits this era. RWBY maybe feels a little bit juvenile, but is overall handled very well, and still finding her feet as team leader. What's most interesting to me is her dynamic with Blake. RWBY is not only deeply interested in Blake's mood, but very worried about her, and also straight up talking about how cool and mysterious she is, among other things. Blake also shows her high regard for RWBY as a leader here, and genuinely kind of feels like a blend of Defrosting the Ice Queen and Knight in Sour Armor. Legitimately, if this had come out in English or otherwise been adapted visually, I think Ladybug would have been a vastly more prominent ship in the fandom, which is really fascinating to think about. Frankly, it's worth reading for the Blake and RWBY material alone. Ford Lee is also an effective villain, able to play the role of charming businessman, deeply dramatic supervillain, and utterly vile bigot. His semblance is also quite OP, as it basically lets him use a malleable shadow to rob his enemies of momentum. RWBY overcoming that almost feels like a hint at her semblance's true nature. However, Ford Lee also does lead us into some of the critique. Namely, the handling of bigotry is rather, well, it does that thing where the source of bigotry is from the bigot having a bad experience with the subject of their hatred. It ignores the cultural and systemic sources of bigotry, which are actually where it comes from, in order to explain its presence. This definitely undercuts the themes a little bit. Though the fact that White Fang got portrayed relatively well here, and the seething hatred from the Brotherhood, did offset that somewhat. The fact they try and source Fort Lee's bigotry to an abusive Fauna step-parent and then double down on it with Fauna's conspiracy theorist killing his son, though, does then weaken that. Based on some interviews with the creators of Ice Queendom, apparently stories dealing with systemic racism aren't super common in Japan, which is a discussion in of itself, but it does mean that a writer for a light novel with likely very little oversight may have stumbled into some of these pitfalls on pure happenstance. Plus, as mentioned, this is not an official localization, but a non-professional fan translation, and localization is more of an art than a science, and could mean there may have been some missing nuance that was in the original text, or would have been incorporated. Despite these bugbears, I definitely think it's worth a read, and I'm genuinely sad it never got an official translation. Much obliged to Cody C99 overseeing the translation, and thanks to you all for tuning in.